This is our union. You are our union. To Stacy and Richard and Darlene and Terrence, this is what you do every day. And I just can't thank you enough for that. It's union work. And then, our member, Trevor, that national anthem, both national anthems. And she's a music teacher in Miami. And the workers in this hall, they are all union. And one of them, I'm gonna start crying. One of them said to me as I was backstage, she pulls me over and she says, "Thank you for being here. You're making sure we have work." It's our union. And Boston, and that amazing new contract, and having Mayor Wu here talking about you. So look, it's impossible to capture all we have been through the past 2 years. A pandemic and a plot to overturn a presidential election. Mask wars, culture wars, a war on the truth, and a war in Ukraine. Floods in Puerto Rico and fires in New Mexico. Shattering gun violence in Uvalde, Buffalo, Tulsa, Highland Park, and so many other communities. I don't know about you, but Andy, when I saw that part of that video and our trip to Buffalo, I just started crying again. Racism and the fear and trauma it inflicts. An extremist majority on the Supreme Court that eviscerated the Constitution's separation of church and state, overturned Roe, and then hobbled Miranda, the EPA, and states' abilities to keep their citizens safe all in a single month. Oil companies and other corporations reaping, they're probably reeking too, record profits, yet squeezing us dry at the pump in the grocery store. And I haven't even begun to talk about how challenging it's been just to do the work we do and you do, or the people we have loved and lost. Is there anything else that could have been thrown at us? And for all those we have lost, that sorrow never goes away. So please join me for a moment of silence to honor and remember those we have lost. Mothers, brothers, best friends, colleagues, caregivers, people who loved us, people who were loved, and people we loved. The first year of the pandemic was hard, but in many ways this year was harder. It was brutal for public employees. As the need surged for essential services, so did your workloads. The year was brutal for educators. Students returned to campuses and classrooms with enormous needs, and educators, weighted down with more responsibilities, summoned everything you had to help them recover. And it was brutal for nurses and healthcare professionals who have heroically fought the war on COVID. You, the members of our union, have carried the country through the hardest days of the pandemic. You've sacrificed and struggled, and you've brought our students and our communities to a better place. Thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for making a difference. Words alone can't express my profound gratitude to you. So we tried to express it by showing up. Fed, Evie, and I, we've been road warriors. Wherever you were, we tried to be there. In schools and bus depots, union halls and coffee shops, hospitals and picket lines. And at last count, I think I've been to more than 150 work sites in the last 14 months. Yes, that does include the picket lines. I see the stress and strain. I see the frustration. But I also see your work. The work to get schools and colleges open, to help students connect and learn, the organizing that made our workplaces safer, the organizing to get the resources we need, the engagement with parents and communities. And I see the attacks on public schools and universities and the people who work in them. Attacks on healthcare personnel, attacks on democracy, attacks on our freedoms. Demagogues playing on fear, fear of the other, fear of change, fear built on false narratives. And the tech companies aren't helping. Social media is weaponizing this hatred and division. Being online can be like swimming with sharks, most alarmingly for our kids. And too many politicians are making it worse. And you know the politicians I'm talking about, the ones who stoke grievances rather than solve problems. They should be helping us help kids and communities, not making it harder with their culture wars and division. Frankly, in times like this, I lean on my faith. I often tease that my wife is a rabbi, and she's sitting right here. Thank you, Sharon, for being here. But seriously, I think a lot about the Bible story of Esther, who also lived in troubled time, when those in power sought to maintain their privilege through oppression. And at a pivotal moment, a reluctant Esther was told, "You have been put here for such a time as this. You've been put here for such a time as this." And she acted. She acted. My friends, so must we. Now, this certainty comes not only from the faith I was raised in, but my faith in you, in us, and in our movement. We are here for a reason. So here's how I see it. And some of you have heard me say this. This moment can be viewed through the lens of fear or hope, despair or aspiration, self-interest or the greater good. And the members of our union definitively, defiantly, and undeniably choose hope, aspiration, and the greater good. That's who you are. So when the last administration's response to COVID was chaotic and reckless, our members were on the front lines, putting themselves and their loved ones at risk, and we haven't stopped. When healthcare corporations put profits over patients, we made safety and care for patients and providers the priority. So, as you heard from Darlene, when nurses and healthcare personnel had to resort to wearing garbage bags as protective gear, the AFT scoured the globe, and I mean the globe, and we bought $3 million worth of PPE for our members. And now, we're fighting for safety and respect and the contract language to enforce it, from the Washington State Nurses Association Fight for Safe Staffing, and I saw the Washington State nurses here earlier, to the strikes at Bacchus Hospital in Connecticut, Jersey Shore University Medical Center, you know that that is in New Jersey, and in Bend, Oregon. When others played blame games during the pandemic, our members rolled up our sleeves and made in-person learning safe and welcoming. The AFT embarked on an unprecedented Back to School for All campaign last summer, giving $5 million in grants to 1,800 AFT affiliates, many of whom are in this room, serving 20 million students. We stood up, you stood up, in-person summer school. We answered families' questions. We provided mobile vaccination clinics and after-school reading support, and we worked to create safe and welcoming environments for our students from pre-K to college. When culture warriors tried to prevent teachers from teaching honest history, we stood up and stand up for teaching the truth, the good, the bad, and the mountains we climbed. Between Share My Lesson, the Shanker Institute, and as Fed talked about, AFT's partnership with NewsGuard for media literacy, we are supporting our members to teach civics and honest history so that young people can reckon with our past, understand our present, and create a better future. And as I announced last summer, the AFT has a legal defense fund for any member who is punished for teaching the truth. When privatizers try to end public education as we know it, we defend public education as the public good it is, and we fight for the learning conditions you and our students need. We press for President Biden's American Rescue Plan with $170 billion to enable schools and colleges to open safely, to support students with disabilities, to hire and retain essential school staff. And then, at the ground level, as Stacy said, because that is where it happens, locals from Minneapolis to St. Paul, from Scranton to Providence, from Los Angeles to New York, have won vital student supports like school nurses, mental health services, guidance counselors, and smaller class sizes. And among the other benefits AFT offers, we have a trauma benefit for all members. You can get the information on the website. We made sure we bought it for everyone. And we also offer, obviously, the support for collective bargaining and for locals in crisis, like Terrence was talking about. When others ignore crushing student debt, which disproportionately hurts young people of color, we give our members the tools to eliminate it. The AFT has held hundreds of student debt clinics, and as you heard from Rich, we went to court. We sued Navient to stop its misleading loan practices, and we sued former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to fix the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Now, get this. I want you to hear this number. Borrowers have had, since this past October, $8.1 billion of student debt forgiven so far because of our advocacy around PSLF. That's 145,000 borrowers. We need to make that every single member of our union who has the promise of PSLF, we want to make sure that that promise can be redeemed. Here's just one example. Last month, we helped an AFT member in California wipe out her $450,000 student debt. And now, the entire AFL-CIO is joining us in this fight to cancel student debt. When grandmothers are gunned down at a grocery store or at a July 4th parade, and children and teachers are murdered at school, we demand an end to this carnage and to the gun deaths that occur every day in this country. And more than 100 AFT locals joined our students. I watched with pride all of the marches in New York, all over, and I joined our students at the March for Our Lives rally in Washington. And while not enough, federal common sense gun safety legislation was passed, the first in 3 decades. When people with power try to lock in systems that privilege the few, decimate the middle class, and make every day a struggle for working folks, we fight for a better life for all and for the next generation to do even better. And above all, when people of ill will try to poison our country with fear and anger, we offer a path that lifts everyone up. We fight for everybody's freedoms. We are the antidote to division and despair. That is who we are. Our members in public service, in education, in healthcare, we make a difference in people's lives every single day. That's you. Take our public schools. Students came back with such enormous needs, and you're helping them recover. And Americans know that. In a recent poll, 88% of parents agreed that their child's teachers have done the best they could during these challenging times. So why do we feel under attack all the time? Why are some people blaming us for problems outside of our control, whether caused by the pandemic, poverty, bad policies, or inadequate funding? Why are our opponents going DEFCON 1? Yeah, with sleazy lies about grooming and calling teachers pedophiles? Why are Fox News and some GOP officials spreading these conspiracies and other hateful ideas, which social media then stokes and amplifies? Because the extremists, the anti-public schools crowd, the anti-union crowd, the privatizers, the haters, they see the importance of public schooling as a unifying American value, and they see that Americans value educators. So the extremists plot to change that. We should believe them when they tell us, as Betsy DeVos's pal, Christopher Rufo, did, that to achieve their goal of universal vouchers, they need to be ruthless and brutal, and they need to operate from a premise of universal public school distrust. You see it, he's tweeted it. As our country becomes more diverse, these fear-mongers prey on racial and economic anxieties. They stir up resentment. They create and exacerbate racial and ethnic tribalism. They're promoting despicable conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement Theory, while misrepresenting legitimate academic fields like critical race theory. This is not conservatism, It's extremism. Radical MAGA forces are dividing Americans from each other, spreading lies and hates, and breaking democratic norms to enrich themselves and grab and maintain power. So, how do we uphold decency? How do we bridge these divides? How do we knit the rich tapestry of our country back together? It starts by rebuilding the essential foundations for a better life for all. Essentials like safety. Just as safety has been our North Star to reopen schools and society during the pandemic, safety must now be our North Star to keep our communities and our schools safe from gun violence. Obviously, we must confront the toxic combination of hate and guns. Not by arming teachers, but by getting weapons of war off our streets and out of our schools. Schools must be places where students are known and supported, with access to counselors and mental health professionals, where everyone feels safe, no matter their race, religion, gender identity, ability, or disability. That's why we fight for another essential, sustainable community schools, which help children and families get the health care, food assistance, and other essentials they need in one place. Community schools are hubs that sustain communities. They help rebuild and deepen relationships within and beyond the school, and they make it possible for teachers to teach and for kids just to be kids. And let's make sure that kids have ample recess and play in the school day. Music, arts, sports, student government, robotics, clubs, that's what creates joy. And frankly, and some of you have heard me say this, joy is essential for all of us. And if you've ever heard my wife preach, you'd hear her say, joy is an act of spiritual resistance. The AFT and our affiliates currently support more than 700 community schools nationwide, from Deer River, Minnesota, to Rome, New York, from Boston to Los Angeles. And we have an ambitious goal to expand our union's reach to 2,500 community schools over the next 5 years. And because of our advocacy and the work of champions like Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Appropriations Chair Rosa DeLauro, federal funding for community schools just doubled. Another essential is the knowledge and skills necessary to thrive in today's world. That means a strong foundation in reading, math, and science, and practical life skills and critical thinking. That's why today the AFT is launching our What Our Kids and Communities Need campaign. So while these extremist politicians are trying to drive a wedge between parents and teachers by banning books, censoring curriculum, and politicizing public education, we're focused on investing in public schools and the essential knowledge and skills that our students need. We're focused on accelerating learning, not just catching up. And we're fighting for the conditions that students need, like state-of-the-art buildings with good ventilation, lower class sizes, and mental health resources. And if any politician is listening to this today, if you truly want to help kids thrive, you need to invest in this too. Take reading. Reading not only affects all other academic achievement, it affects and it's essential for well-being. It's key to unlocking assignments in school and passions in life. Through our Reading Opens the World campaign, the AFT, as many of you know, are giving out 1 million books to children and school staffs in communities across America, along with tips to promote literacy and a love of reading. And the reason I know many of you know is because to date, you have distributed more than 612,000 books in events hosted by 127 AFT locals and counting, by the way, in 20 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And if you've been part of these reading initiatives, you've seen kids and their parents bubble with excitement and joy as they pick out books to take home. So, if during this convention we get requests that surpass 1 million books, we're going to find the funds to give away another 1 million books next school year. And while I'm on the topic of books and reading, can we show some love to the superheroes of the stacks, our librarians? Now, we're working on another essential, career and technical education. From cybersecurity to culinary arts, aviation, auto and transit tech, healthcare and green jobs, high-quality CTE programs can equip young people with the knowledge and skills they need for all these careers. And they make a lot of money in all these careers. Nearly all the young people in CTE programs today graduate from high school, and many of them go to college. Why not have these broad choices for all of our youth? We need pathways, yes, of course, to affordable, accessible college, but we also need pathways to careers. And if Germany can make internships and apprenticeships fundamental parts of their education system, why can't we? And that's why we're envisioning a new career and tech ed center in New Lexington, a rural community in Southeast Ohio. Now, of course, parents and educators must be partners. We don't hope that happens, we make it happen. Like in Los Angeles, where Reclaim Our Schools LA, I heard UTLA, which is a coalition of parents and UTLA and others, won millions of dollars in investments for the Black Student Achievement Plan and to dramatically expand community schools. Yay, UTLA. And then in Chicago, where parents supported CTU's strike for the schools children deserve. In Florida and Texas, where families and educators are joining forces to fight attacks on LGBTQ children. I just heard them. And in New York City, where parents and the UFT have joined forces to lower class size. My home local always has a bet as to how many times I will mention them in a speech. And here in Boston, you just heard it, BTU and the Boston Ed Justice Alliance have won school funding. They stopped the state's threatened district takeover. You had the mayor here, and they have a brand new contract. Thank you, BTU. We're deepening this work through AFT's Powerful Partnership Institute, which supports family and community engagement. And this year, we're giving out 20 grants to AFT locals, totaling $1.5 million to further this work. Now, of course, the people who do all of this work are essential. But a recent Gallup poll found that K-12 professionals are the most burnt out workers in America, and college educators come in second. Teachers and school staff have been struggling for years with a lack of respect, inadequate resources, subpar compensation, and endless paperwork, And then came COVID. Before the pandemic, nearly 300,000 teachers left the profession each year, 2/3 before retirement age. COVID, culture wars, gun violence, and other strains have made teachers' already tough job even harder, driving many people out of the classroom. We have a crisis in the profession that makes all other professions possible. So our union is not just decrying the problem, we're finding solutions. Earlier this year, the AFT created our Teacher and School Staff Shortage Task Force. Yes, we have a teacher shortage. Why? Because we have a shortage of respect for educators. We have a shortage of professional working conditions that allow teachers and other school staff to do their best for students. And we have a shortage of pay for what is arguably the most important job in the world. No wonder teachers' job satisfaction is up 34 points. Job dissatisfaction is up 34 points since the start of the pandemic. The teacher shortage is the direct result of a shortage of conditions, respect, and pay. And we're not going to fix the one without fixing the others. Educators want what students need, but we need the time, the tools, and the trust to do our jobs. So there are 4 key areas that need to change: climate, culture, conditions, and compensation. And I don't know about you, but I just love those billionaires who talk about the virtues of markets, but are stunningly silent when it comes to making educator salaries competitive. So we'll take up the task force recommendations during this convention, and I'm honored that the 2 chairs of the task force, Carl Williams and Michael Mulgrew, will be presenting that work. Likewise, the AFT's Healthcare Staffing Shortage Task Force is addressing the crisis in healthcare. Working conditions have deteriorated in many healthcare settings for years, if not decades. Violence against healthcare workers is a growing problem that is exacerbated by inadequate staffing. And the strain from the pandemic has created even more burnout, moral distress, and impossible working conditions. Just ask any nurse. This crisis threatens the safety of patients, the stability of the American healthcare system, and the physical, emotional, and mental well-being of healthcare providers. Nearly 1/3 of bedside professionals are contemplating leaving the profession. That number jumps to nearly 1/2 for ICU nurses. And if that doesn't get officials to act, this terrible fact should. Some healthcare workers are twice as likely to die by suicide than the general public. So this week, you'll also consider the resolution put forth by this task force. It calls for, obviously, pay increases, but addressing staffing ratios and safe patient limits, violence in healthcare workplaces, and a ban on mandatory overtime. Now, we know that some staffing shortages are by design. No doubt, some of you remember that anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist, who said he didn't want to abolish government, he just wanted it to be so small he could drown it in a bathtub. And now, rather than use the American Rescue Plan as it was intended to fund essential public services, some politicians are doing just the opposite, which is why our public employees are fighting so hard to fund our future. So this leads me, I know, where is PEF? That's their campaign. Exactly. This leads me to another essential, the fact that everybody needs a raise. And while the latest jobs report and the fact that gas prices are going down are hopeful signs, Higher prices hurt. At the pump, grocery stores, and pretty much everywhere. Inflation is gripping the world. COVID has shuttered factories, wreaked havoc on supply chains, and made transporting goods much costlier. And then there's the oil gangsters like Vladimir Putin and the price-gouging oil companies who literally have us over a barrel. The top 5 oil companies in the United States reap profits of $35 billion in the first quarter of 2022. That's 300% higher than the year before. You wonder who is exploiting this crisis? Higher prices hurt even more because the federal minimum wage has been just $7.25 since 2009. And so many workers, including many of our adjunct professors, food service workers, and bus drivers, are not even able to afford life's basic necessities. Higher prices hurt because the Republicans in Congress keep blocking efforts to lower the cost of prescription drugs. And they hurt because private equity firms are scooping up real estate, causing the price of rent and homes to skyrocket. And higher prices hurt because employers keep beating back unionization drives, leaving a lot of Americans feeling powerless. There is power in a union. 2/3 of Americans support unions, the highest level since 1965, and nearly half of non-union workers said if they could join a union in their workplace, they would. And young workers are even more enthusiastic about unions. And Joe Biden is the most pro-union American president ever. But today, Americans are 11 times more likely to have an Amazon Prime membership than to have a union card. This is the moment for our movement. Unions built the middle class in America, and we can rebuild it through the transformative power of collective bargaining. The essence of unionism is simple yet powerful. Together, we can accomplish things that would be impossible alone. That's why we're supporting workers at Amazon and Starbucks who want a union, and it's why working people are joining the AFT. 70 new units since our last convention 2 years ago. People who work in charter schools, in libraries, in higher education. It's why AFT and the AAUP just came together in a historic affiliation, and there is unprecedented interest in new organizing in healthcare, including amongst physicians. So look out at this room, or at least I'm looking out at you. I see a union that, despite everything that has been thrown at us, we remain 1.7 million members strong. I see a union, and I see people who, when the Supreme Court tried to destroy us in the Janus decision, we said hell no and AFT yes. I see the people in this hall who are building the fastest growing union in healthcare and higher education. And I see even more than that. I see a union using our power as a force for good, for our members, our families, and our communities, to create a more just and equitable society, and now more than ever, to defend our democracy. Let's remember what democracy is. And I'm sorry, once a social studies teacher, always a social studies teacher. Democracy is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's the rule of the majority. It's power vested in the people and exercised by them through free and fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power. But, and I say this with great fear and sorrow, we may have seen our last free and fair election. Anti-democracy forces worked overtime in advance of the 2020 election to limit voting rights, purging eligible people from voting rolls, limiting who could vote by mail, reducing ballot drop-off locations, and closing polling places so that many voters had to wait hours to cast their ballots. And despite all these obstacles, the American people came out in record numbers in 2020, during a pandemic no less, to vote. President Biden received the most votes ever cast for a U.S. presidential candidate, winning by more than 7 million votes. But instead of celebrating this participation in democracy, anti-democracy forces attacked it. Okay, that was par for the course for Donald Trump. He attacked the free press, he lied pathologically, he winked at white nationalists and homegrown hate movements, he threatened to imprison his political opponents, and he openly invited foreign interference in our elections. But then, you see the picture with Rudy next to him. But then, Trump engaged in the big lie that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from him. Remember when he engaged in the birtherism lie? This was the new big lie. Even though he knew there was no evidence then or now to support that lie. And it's shocking, the lengths to which Trump and his allies went to keep power at all costs. He badgered election officials to find him votes. He leaned on the Justice Department to investigate baseless election fraud claims. He hatched a plot to send Vice President Pence fraudulent electors. And when none of that worked, on January 6th, he sought to lead an armed mob to the United States Capitol to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Our democracy held, but it is in danger. Thanks to the big lie, 7 of 10 Republicans think the 2020 presidential election was stolen. And according to a poll released in June, more than 1/4 of U.S. residents feel it might soon be necessary to take up arms against the government. And these same enemies of democracy who cast doubt on the integrity of the 2020 presidential election are now laying the groundwork to interfere with vote counting and manipulate the outcome of future elections. I know we all read the polls that say inflation and rising prices are the most important issues for voters this November. And obviously, we need to elect leaders who will work to make the economy work for everybody. But look at the plan released by Senator Rick Scott, the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. If they win the Senate, just listen to this. If they win the Senate, they want to sunset every federal law every 5 years. What do you think that means for civil rights, for Medicare, for Social Security? So friends, our democracy is on the line. Our economic security is on the line, and so are our freedoms. I started today talking about the decisions handed out by the extremist majority of the Supreme Court, including the 3 that Donald Trump appointed. They're legislating from the bench. They're overturning long-standing legal precedents, and they are eviscerating rights. If this is not a 10-alarm fire, I don't know what is. We got one shot at changing this. We must vote in November as if our lives depend on it, because they do. You held up institutions during the pandemic, our healthcare systems, our public schools, our colleges, our public services. Now, we need to hold our democracy together. Elections matter. If we turn the keys back to Mitch McConnell and the MAGA movement, the consequences will be catastrophic. And elections matter at the state and local levels too. Remember Scott Walker? I guess you do. His first act as governor was to strip collective bargaining for state employees in Wisconsin. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker restored bargaining rights for Chicago's teachers. Remember Chris Christie? As governor of New Jersey, he jeopardized public workers' pensions, while current Governor Phil Murphy has ensured their solvency. And in California, Governor Gavin Newsom just funded health care for part-time college faculty. And in New Mexico, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham launched a moonshot for public education. And look at the difference elections make in school board races and budgets. Like this year, when 99% of the school budgets in New York State were approved. That's not a typo, 99%. And huge majorities of pro-public education candidates won their school board races in Montana, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and New York. So no wonder Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is trying to buy school board seats I guess our feelings about him are known. Trying to buy school board seats, promising $250,000 to any school board candidate who takes his loyalty oath. So, we know what to do. Organize, mobilize, just like we did after Janus, just like we do in contract campaigns, just like we did in the 2020 elections. Look, I know we are tired. I know we're exhausted. But if we don't do it, it ain't gonna happen. Remember, we're here for a reason. We have to knock on doors. We have to talk to and listen to people. We gotta organize and mobilize around the issues that keep people up at night. We gotta elect allies who share our goals. And what happens if we don't? Walter Reuther, the legendary president of the UAW, he often reminded people that what the labor movement wins at the bargaining table can be taken away at the ballot box. I don't know how to say this any more plainly. Everything is at risk. Our freedoms, our democracy, our basic economic safety net. How do we turn our aspirations into action? How do we make life better for people? We vote. We march and we vote. We mourn and we vote. We donate and we vote. We make good trouble and we vote. So what do we have to do this November? Say it again. Say it a third time. So, thank you. I talked a lot about the essentials for a better life for all of us. And I want to conclude with what I believe to be the most essential of all. And that's acknowledging the humanity of all people, not just the people we're comfortable with. Now, everyone has been vulnerable in their lives. And as a gay teenager, that feeling of vulnerability rarely left me. And when I realized who I was, I realized I didn't just feel vulnerable, but I was vulnerable. And I felt completely, terrifyingly alone. We've all felt vulnerable in some ways, especially during this challenging time. But for some people, vulnerability is a constant. The mom whose heart races every time her black son goes out at night. The family that fears any knock at the door could be immigration agents coming to separate them. People who have lost their job or who work multiple jobs and still never have enough. People who are immunocompromised, for whom the great unmasking brings fear, not freedom. So maybe my vulnerability makes it easier for me to see the humanity of the gay teacher in Kentucky who left the profession he loves because of who he loves. And maybe it's easier for me to relate to the trans kids who some people hate just because they are being who they are. I know change can be uncomfortable, but we've all been vulnerable. It's a terrible feeling. And I hope that no one would want anyone else to feel that just for being who they are. We all want to be seen. I'm asking us to see each other. We're in a race between hope and fear, between decency and cruelty, between the survival of democracy and the rise of autocracy. And that is why we must act. As the author and activist Grace Paley said, the only recognizable feature of hope is action. And we act every time we encourage someone to vote. We act every time we stand up for what our students need. We act when we all stand together so that none of us feel alone. We act when we step up for working people and the right to a union, and we act when we defend the very survival of American democracy. We've been through a lot, so this summer, recharge, relax, reconnect, and then act. This is a moment to stand up and be counted, to live our convictions, to engage, not withdraw. No matter how tired, no matter how frustrated we are, we cannot be bystanders. Remember Esther, we've been put here for such a time as this. We are here for a reason, to heal, to help, to teach, to vote and get out the vote, to fight for justice and dignity for our children and our country, for our democracy and our freedoms. And that way, we will achieve a better life for all. Thank you very much, AFT.